"I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate," Bradley announced with a smug grin, his voice echoing through the courtroom like he was announcing lottery numbers. The confidence in his tone made my stomach turn. But if you want to know how I made him regret every single word of that statement, hit subscribe and drop a comment right now, because this courtroom revenge is going to be absolutely satisfying. But first, I want to hear from all of you. Tell me which country you're watching from, your age, and how you discovered this story. Did it randomly appear on your feed, or did someone share it with you? Drop all that information in the comments because I read every single one and I want to know where my amazing audience is tuning in from. My name is Judith Crawford. I'm 45 years old, and I never imagined I'd be sitting in a divorce court in Nashville, Tennessee, watching my husband of 5 years try to steal everything I'd worked for my entire life. Bradley sat across the room with his lawyer, looking like he'd already won the lottery. His expensive suit, one I'd paid for of course, was perfectly pressed, and his golden hair was slicked back in that way that used to charm me, but now made me sick. "Your Honor," Bradley's lawyer continued, "my client deserves half of all marital assets, including the large inheritance Mrs. Crawford received during their marriage." The lawyer's briefcase was stuffed with documents, all of them explaining how Bradley planned to walk away with my grandmother's hard-earned money. I watched the courtroom viewers lean forward in their seats, clearly interested by what they assumed would be a massive financial settlement. Some of them were probably calculating the numbers in their heads, wondering how much Bradley would walk away with. A few reporters had even shown up, drawn by whispers of a multi-million-dollar divorce case involving a well-known Nashville businesswoman. Judge Richardson, a stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, reviewed the initial paperwork with a neutral expression. She'd been leading family court for over 20 years, and I imagined she'd seen every trick in the book. But something told me she hadn't seen what I was about to reveal. Bradley turned slightly in his chair to flash me what he probably thought was a victorious smile. The nerve of it made my blood boil. This was the same man who used to bring me coffee in bed, who claimed he loved me for who I was, not what I had. 5 years of marriage, and it had all been a lie. The courtroom felt heavy with its dark wood paneling and the weight of legal proceedings hanging in the air. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of Nashville traffic, people going about their normal lives while mine was being examined in front of strangers. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the envelope inside that would change everything. "Mrs. Crawford," Judge Richardson addressed me directly. "Do you have any response to these claims?" I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my determination stronger than ever. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when Bradley's greed would finally catch up with him. "Your Honor, I believe there's something the court needs to see." Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier in our relationship. Bradley had swept me off my feet during a particularly vulnerable time in my life. I'd just turned 40 and was running my consulting firm, Brightville Vale Analytics, with modest success, but little time for romance. My grandmother had been my closest companion until her death 3 years before I met Bradley, and I was still grieving her loss when he appeared at a business conference in Memphis. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my work helping small businesses improve their operations. "You're brilliant," he'd say, watching me review financial reports. "I've never met anyone who understands numbers the way you do." At the time, I thought he was impressed by my intelligence. Now I realized he was calculating my net worth. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners and romantic getaways. Bradley worked as a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, but he always seemed to have money for fancy dates. "I believe in investing in the people I care about," he'd say, when I questioned his spending. I was flattered by his attention and generosity, not realizing he was already planning his long-term investment strategy. When Bradley proposed after 8 months, I was hesitant. My grandmother had always warned me about men who move too fast. But Bradley was persistent. "Life's too short to wait," he insisted. "I know what I want, and I want you." His proposal was elaborate. A private dinner on a riverboat with a quartet playing our favorite songs. The ring was stunning, probably worth more than his annual salary, though I didn't think about that at the time. My lawyer, Patricia Holbrook, had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. "Any successful businesswoman needs protection," she'd explained. "It's not romantic, but it's practical." I'd felt awkward bringing it up with Bradley, worried he'd think I didn't trust him, or that I was more focused on money than love. But Bradley's reaction surprised me. He laughed and waved it off like it was nothing. "Of course, darling. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for you." He signed the papers without even reading them, joking that love doesn't need fine print. His casual attitude convinced me that my worries were unnecessary. "It's just a romantic formality," he'd said, scribbling his signature with a flourish, like promising to love, honor, and cherish, but with more legal jargon. I remembered feeling relieved that he was so understanding, so willing to put my concerns at ease. Patricia had been thorough in creating the agreement, protecting not just my existing assets, but any future inheritance or business growth. "Your grandmother's estate will eventually come to you," she'd reminded me. "This ensures it stays in your family where it belongs." At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now I realized she'd been absolutely right. The real shock came 18 months into our marriage when I received the call about my grandmother's estate. She'd left me everything: her house, her investments, her collection of rare books, and $2.8 million in carefully managed funds. It was far more than I'd ever expected, and the inheritance transformed my financial situation overnight. Bradley's reaction to the news had been revealing, though I'd missed the significance at the time. His eyes had literally lit up when I told him about the money. $2.8 million, he'd repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Judith, we're rich." The way he said "we're" should have been my first clue. From that moment forward, Bradley's spending habits changed dramatically. He quit his job within 6 months, claiming he wanted to explore new opportunities and be there to support my success. What he actually did was spend my money like it was his own personal allowance. He bought a luxury car supposedly for networking purposes. He invested in a friend's restaurant without asking me, losing $30,000 when the business failed within a year. He booked expensive vacations, joined an exclusive golf club, and started dressing like he'd always been wealthy. Every time I questioned a purchase, he'd remind me that we're partners and that couples should trust each other with financial decisions. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I discovered Bradley had been telling people at the country club that the inheritance was family money that belonged to both of us. He'd started introducing himself as an investor and entrepreneur, conveniently forgetting to mention that all his investments were made with my grandmother's carefully saved wealth. When I confronted him about his lies and his spending, Bradley became defensive, and then cruel. "You act like it's some big secret that I married up," he snapped. "Everyone knows you need someone like me to enjoy life. Before we met, you were just a lonely workaholic with no social life." His words cut deep, because there was a grain of truth in them. I had been lonely, and Bradley had brought excitement and companionship into my life. But I realized he'd been playing a long game, positioning himself as my savior while carefully planning to claim everything I'd inherited. The final straw came when I found emails between Bradley and his lawyer discussing divorce strategy. They'd been planning this for months, timing it to increase his potential settlement. Bradley had even researched Tennessee's divorce laws, looking for ways to claim that his emotional support and lifestyle contributions entitled him to a larger share of my assets. That's when I'd finally contacted Patricia again and filed for divorce myself. I refused to let Bradley control the narrative or the timeline. If he wanted to fight over my grandmother's money, I'd give him one. But it wouldn't go the way he expected. Now standing in this courtroom, I was ready to show Bradley and everyone else exactly what his greed had earned him. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope that Patricia had prepared for this exact moment. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the air conditioning system. Bradley's confident expression weakened slightly as he watched me approach the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I believe the court needs to review this document before proceeding with any asset division discussions." Judge Richardson extended her hand and accepted the envelope. "What is the nature of this document, Mrs. Crawford?" "It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, one that my husband signed before our marriage 5 years ago." The change in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate and electric. Bradley's lawyer, a thin man named Gerald Weston, shot up from his chair like he'd been stung. "Your Honor, we were not made aware of any prenuptial agreement. This is highly irregular." "Sit down, Mr. Weston," Judge Richardson commanded, already breaking the seal on the envelope. I'll examine the documents and determine their validity. I returned to my seat, keeping my eyes focused on Bradley. His face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic in the span of 30 seconds. He was whispering frantically to his lawyer, gesturing toward the judge's bench. I could make out fragments of his urgent words. She never mentioned, and how is this possible? Patricia Holbrook, my lawyer, remained perfectly calm beside me. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, ensuring every detail of our strategy was foolproof. Just watch, she whispered to me with a small smile. Judge Richardson was a thorough reader, taking her time with each page of the agreement. The document was comprehensive. Patricia had made sure of that 5 years ago. It outlined exactly which assets were protected, which debts would remain separate, and most importantly, how any future inheritance would be handled. This appears to be a properly executed prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson announced after several minutes of careful review. It's dated 6 weeks before your marriage, witnessed by 2 notaries, and signed by both parties. Bradley's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I realized that Gerald Weston had filed this divorce case without doing basic research. He'd assumed, just like Bradley, that the marriage was a straightforward asset grab. Your Honor. Bradley suddenly stood up, his voice cracking slightly. I need to see that document. I don't remember signing anything like that. The judge's eyebrows rose at Bradley's outburst. Mr. Crawford, please remain seated and allow your lawyer to handle these proceedings. But Bradley was spiraling now, his carefully built confidence crumbling. Judith, what is this? You never told me this was some kind of legal trap. Mr. Crawford, Judge Richardson's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. You will remain silent or I will hold you in contempt. Your lawyer may request to review the document through proper channels. Gerald Weston approached the bench with obvious reluctance. I watched him examine the prenuptial agreement, his face growing paler with each page. He returned to his table and began whispering urgently to Bradley, who was shaking his head in disbelief. The courtroom viewers were now fully engaged, sensing that something dramatic was unfolding. I could hear muffled conversations and the scratching of reporters' pens as they tried to capture every detail of Bradley's public humiliation. Your Honor, Gerald finally addressed the court, his voice notably lacking its earlier confidence. My client would like to request a brief recess to review these documents more thoroughly. Judge Richardson checked her watch. Mr. Weston, did you not conduct discovery regarding potential prenuptial agreements before filing your asset claims? The lawyer's silence was enough. Bradley had been so confident in his strategy that he'd never even mentioned the possibility of a prenup to his lawyer. Gerald Weston had been blindsided just as much as his client. I'll give you 10 minutes to review the document, Judge Richardson declared. But I should warn you that this appears to be a legally binding agreement that significantly impacts your client's claims. During the recess, I watched Bradley and his lawyer huddled in intense conversation near the courtroom windows. Bradley's gestures were becoming more animated and desperate as Gerald explained the implications of the prenuptial agreement. Even from across the room, I could see the exact moment when Bradley realized his plan had completely backfired. Patricia used the time to review her own notes and prepare for what she knew would be Bradley's last-ditch attempts to challenge the agreement. He's going to claim fraud or pressure, she predicted quietly. Men like Bradley always blame everyone else when their schemes fall apart. She was right. When court resumed, Gerald Weston immediately launched into a desperate legal argument. Your Honor, my client believes he was deceived about the nature of this document. Mrs. Crawford presented it as a romantic formality, not a comprehensive asset protection agreement. Judge Richardson looked distinctly unimpressed. Mr. Weston, are you claiming your client signed a legal document without reading it? Your Honor, my client trusted his wife-to-be. He believed she was being honest about the document's scope and implications. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Bradley had always prided himself on being a shrewd businessman, someone who could read people and situations. Now his lawyer was arguing that he was too trusting and naive to understand a legal contract. The document is clearly labeled as a prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson observed, flipping through the pages. It includes standard warnings about seeking independent legal counsel. Did your client choose to waive that right? Gerald shuffled through his papers nervously. Yes, Your Honor. And the document was reviewed by a notary public, correct? With your client present and confirming his identity? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Richardson turned her attention directly to Bradley. Mr. Crawford, when you signed this document, did anyone force you to do so? Were you under any kind of pressure or threat? Bradley's face was red with embarrassment and anger. No, Your Honor, but I thought it was just paperwork. Judith made it sound like it didn't matter. Did you read the document before signing it? The question hung in the air like a sword. Bradley looked around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable for everyone present. Mr. Crawford, I asked you a direct question. I skimmed it, Bradley finally admitted, but Judith said it was just a formality. Judge Richardson's expression was a masterpiece of judicial disapproval. Mr. Crawford, you signed a legal document without reading it after waiving your right to legal counsel, and now you're asking this court to invalidate it because you didn't take it seriously. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing, mesmerized by Bradley's public humiliation. I felt a surge of satisfaction watching him squirm under the judge's scrutiny. Your Honor, Gerald made one final attempt. Perhaps we could argue that the agreement is unconscionable given the disparity in... Mr. Weston, Judge Richardson interrupted. Have you reviewed the financial disclosures included with this prenuptial agreement? Gerald flipped through the document again, clearly searching for something he'd missed. There are extensive financial disclosures here, Your Honor. Indeed there are. Mrs. Crawford provided complete documentation of her assets, income, and expected inheritance. Your client signed acknowledgments confirming he reviewed and understood all financial information. This is one of the most thorough prenuptial agreements I've seen in my 23 years on the bench. Bradley looked like he was about to be sick. The golden boy who had charmed his way through life was finally facing consequences for his actions. Judge Richardson cleared her throat and began reading directly from the prenuptial agreement, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Section 4, Paragraph A. All assets owned by either party prior to marriage shall remain the separate property of that party. Section 4, Paragraph B. Any inheritance received by either party during the marriage shall be considered separate property and shall not be subject to division upon divorce. Bradley's face went through a spectrum of colors. Red to white to green. He gripped the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were white. That can't be legal, he muttered loud enough for several people to hear. Section 6, Judge Richardson continued, addresses spousal support. Quote, neither party shall be entitled to alimony or spousal support from the other, regardless of the length of the marriage or the disparity in income. The judge looked up from the document. This section was initiated by both parties and witnessed separately. Gerald Weston was frantically taking notes, probably trying to find any possible loophole or technicality. But Patricia had been too thorough 5 years ago. Every potential challenge had been anticipated and addressed. Your Honor, I stood up. If I may address the court. Proceed, Mrs. Crawford. When I inherited my grandmother's estate 18 months ago, I consulted with my lawyer about whether the inheritance was protected under the prenuptial agreement. We confirmed that it was fully covered under Section 4, Paragraph B. The inheritance has been kept in separate accounts and has never been mixed with marital assets. This was the final nail in Bradley's coffin. Not only was the prenup ironclad, but I'd been carefully cautious about keeping the inheritance separate. There was no way for him to claim any portion of it. Judge Richardson nodded approvingly. Mrs. Crawford, did you use any portion of your inheritance for marital expenses or joint purchases? No, Your Honor. I maintained my regular income for household expenses. The inheritance has remained completely separate. Bradley exploded. That's not true. She bought things for us. She paid for vacations. Mr. Crawford? Judge Richardson's voice was ice cold. You are out of order. Sit down immediately. But Bradley was beyond reason now. His carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. This is insane. I've been with her for 5 years. I supported her emotionally. I gave up my career. You quit your job to spend my money, I said quietly, unable to help myself. Mrs. Crawford, Judge Richardson warned, but her tone was almost amused. Gerald was tugging on Bradley's jacket, trying to get him to sit down and stop making things worse. But Bradley was in full meltdown mode, his true nature finally showing through. She trapped me. Bradley shouted. She made me think we were partners. She let me believe that money was ours. Mr. Crawford, if you cannot control yourself, I will have the bailiff remove you from my courtroom. The threat of being physically removed finally broke through Bradley's rage. He sat down heavily, his chest heaving with angry breaths, but the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had seen his true character, the greedy, entitled man who had married me for my money and then had the nerve to act like a victim when his plan failed. Judge Richardson reviewed the final pages of the prenuptial agreement with deliberate care. The tension in the room was intense as everyone waited for her ruling. I felt a calm satisfaction settling over me. After months of Bradley's manipulation and lies, the truth was finally coming to light. Based on my review of this prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson announced, I am ready to render my decision on asset division. Judge Richardson removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Bradley with an expression that could have frozen fire. Mr. Crawford, this prenuptial agreement is valid, comprehensive, and legally binding. You are entitled to exactly nothing from your wife's premarital assets, inheritance, or business holdings. The words hit Bradley like physical blows. His mouth fell open, and he stared at the judge in complete disbelief. Nothing? He whispered. Nothing, Judge Richardson confirmed. Furthermore, according to Section 7 of this agreement, all debts incurred individually by either party remain the responsibility of that party. Mrs. Crawford, do you have documentation of debts incurred solely by your husband? Patricia handed me a thick folder, which I passed to the bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Credit card debts, the car loan, the failed restaurant investment, and country club fees totaling approximately $87,000. Bradley's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The case he'd thought would earn him a large fee had turned into a complete disaster. Mr. Crawford, Judge Richardson continued, not only will you receive no assets from this marriage, but you remain personally responsible for $87,000 in debt that you accumulated during the marriage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. I could hear someone behind me stifle a laugh. Bradley had gone from expecting millions to facing bankruptcy in the span of 30 minutes. Your Honor. Bradley's voice was barely audible. This can't be right. 5 years of marriage has to count for something. Judge Richardson's smile was razor sharp. It does count for something, Mr. Crawford. It counts as an expensive lesson in reading legal documents before signing them. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. The court grants the divorce petition filed by Mrs. Crawford. No assets shall be transferred to Mr. Crawford. All individual debts remain with the party who incurred them. This court is adjourned. Bradley sat in stunned silence as the reality of his situation sank in. He'd spent 5 years positioning himself for this moment, only to discover that his plan had been doomed from the day he casually signed the prenuptial agreement without reading it. People began filing out of the courtroom, but I remained seated, watching Bradley's world collapse around him. Gerald Weston was already packing his briefcase, clearly eager to escape this professional embarrassment. Several reporters approached me for comment, but Patricia intercepted them with practiced efficiency. Judith, Bradley called out as I finally stood to leave. We need to talk about this. This isn't over. I turned to face him one last time. Bradley, it was over the moment you decided to marry me for my money instead of loving me for who I am. The prenuptial agreement didn't ruin your plan. Your greed did. His face crumpled as the full weight of his situation hit him. No inheritance, no assets, and crushing debt that would follow him for years. The man who had charmed his way through life had finally met a situation that couldn't be smooth-talked or manipulated away. As I walked toward the courtroom doors with Patricia beside me, I felt lighter than I had in months. The nightmare was finally over, and Bradley's true nature had been exposed for everyone to see. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came with its own sense of poetic irony. Bradley's life unraveled completely in the months following our divorce. The $87,000 in debt forced him into bankruptcy within 6 months, destroying his credit and making it impossible for him to maintain his lifestyle. His reputation in Nashville's business community was ruined when word spread about how he tried to steal his wife's inheritance, making him a cautionary tale about prenuptial agreements and the dangers of marrying for money. The country club revoked his membership when he couldn't pay his dues, and the luxury car was repossessed, leaving him dependent on public transportation. His dating life became non-existent, as women in our social circles learned about his gold-digging scheme, warning each other about the charming man who viewed marriage as a business transaction. He was forced to move in with his elderly parents in Memphis and take an entry-level sales job. His dreams of living off my grandmother's money, replaced by the harsh reality of starting over at 47, with nothing but debt and a damaged reputation. I used a portion of my protected inheritance to establish the Crawford Foundation, which provides legal assistance to women seeking prenuptial agreements and divorce representation, ensuring that other women wouldn't fall victim to financial predators like Bradley. Looking back on my journey from trusting wife to empowered divorcee, I realized that my grandmother's wisdom about protecting family wealth had saved me from more than just financial loss. It had saved me from a lifetime of being used by someone who saw my love as nothing more than a pathway to easy money. Thanks for watching. What's a story you won't forget? Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories like this.